Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. With the winter break being extended in Alberta until January 10th, that has caused some issues for parents. BCN's Angela Stewart has the details. More money will be coming off of your checks thanks to new taxes. Franco Terrazzano with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation will explain. And we hear how a Christian relief agency is helping in the Philippines after a devastating typhoon left more than 300 people dead.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Justice Minister Casey Medu's requests that the Law Enforcement Review Board assess the Lethbridge Police Services databases and records management will proceed. Lethbridge Police Commission Chair Rob Van Spronson says the new deadline is July 31st of this year. Van Spronson says the inquiry will not look at anything specific, but assess a broader picture of policies and procedures of the LPS in regards to how database systems are being used. Lethbridge West MLA Shanna Phillips says she's grateful that the minister asked for the inquiry. Phillips says she was monitored by the LPS back when she was NDP's environment minister. Officers allegedly also took photographs of Phillips while she was at a Lethbridge diner in 2017, posting them anonymously online. Lethbridge Police wrapped up their Christmas Check Stop campaign over the weekend. Police say 12 impaired drivers were taken off the road. There was just a single driver caught during the previous campaign when restrictions resulted in fewer partygoers on the road. This holiday season saw a total of around 1,760 vehicles checked. In addition to the 12 immediate roadside sanction fails, police say they also issued 4 warnings for drivers with a blood alcohol content of 0.05 or greater and 8 for zero tolerance with a graduated driver's license. The province announced that Albertans who've had at least 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine who test positive for the virus will now only need to isolate for 5 days instead of 10. Health Minister Jason Copping made the announcement, saying fully immunized individuals have shorter infectious periods. Symptoms must be fully resolved by the end of the 5-day period, otherwise people must continue to isolate. For 5 days after isolation, those people must wear a mask around others at all times when in public.
We're providing an exception for workplaces where disruption of service for 24 hours or more would be harmful to the public and where there is no other way to continue the service except by bringing workers back before their isolation period has ended. In these exceptional circumstances, additional public health measures will be required. For example, returning workers would not be allowed to remove their masks when in the same room as anyone else at any time, even if they're distanced.
BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and New Brunswick also reduced the self-isolation period to 5 days. Students in kindergarten through grade 12 won't be returning to in-person learning just yet in Alberta. The province announced that the return to in-person classes will be delayed an extra week. This is causing some issues for parents. BCN's Angela Stewart has the details.
During the Christmas holidays is when Kaylin Steele says she received a notification from her son's school saying that the Christmas break is going to be extended.
My son just loves school, and so it's a little bit of a blow to him not to be able to go back and see his friends and his teacher, and there are a lot of questions he's got. Little people have big minds and they have lots of imaginations, and so you say, well, what day is it going to be? Do you know? What is my teacher doing?
Steele's 5-year-old son is in kindergarten, and although his workload isn't much, she says this delay will now affect work for her and her husband.
We're very fortunate that we have office-style jobs, so we can be a bit more flexible with our hours. So what this means is our son will be home with us this week. We're trying our best to stimulate his mind, keep him occupied, keep him happy, and also get our work done, which means we're both working in the evenings and the weekend to make up those hours. So that sacrifices our family time.
On the other hand, Lacey Robinson, who has 2 kids in public school, says the extended return was a blessing in disguise.
I was not prepared for it because the flu hit our home, and so I did not have the time to prepare to get my kids back into the sleep schedule and back into this is what our routine is. So it was a huge blessing that it did get bumped because now I have that time to kind of get my house back in order.
Education Minister Adriana LaGrange says the extra time will give school authorities the time that they need to make sure schools and classrooms are prepared for a safe learning environment as more cases of the new Omicron variant continue to pop up.
With the COVID situation rapidly evolving, so too must our response be. Our plan to pause the return to school is in line with other jurisdictions in Canada.
Students are expected to return to in-person learning on January 10th. The province is expected to release more information on the next steps. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
Thanks to your support, the shelves are stocked with lots of food at the Lethbridge Food Bank. Officials say they received lots of support this year, especially during the busy Christmas holiday season.
Coming into Christmas, we were doing well, and we had a stocked warehouse and prepped and ready. And then our community just came out and just overfilled us. You can see behind me, our warehouse is quite full to the limits right now. And it's really good because what we find is that coming into Christmas, we get a lot of support, and our clients get large hampers, and it works out really well. But these next few months coming up here are the toughest for our clients. It's cold, there's less resources out there, not as many people out giving. So we'll go through a lot of the food that we have right now in these next 2 months. So the support we've seen for Christmas really helps us support for January and February.
Officials with the food bank say besides the food, they also saw a spike in donations thanks to their partnership with the Christmas Hope campaign. Now, one of the most common New Year's resolutions is to get into better shape, lose a little bit of weight. So it's not surprising early in the new year to see fitness centers fill up with new faces as people get started on their very ambitious goals. And here in Lethbridge, the Corvenray YMCA has already seen an uptick in attendance.
Here at the YMCA of Lethbridge, we're excited to support the community in their resolutions as well as their health and well-being throughout the year. So we're excited to see new people come through the doors, members and non-members. We've seen an increase in people coming to the YMCA here at the beginning of January already. Our fitness floor and our whole facility is busy, and lots of excited people here to start their New Year's resolutions.
According to Stats Canada, there are over 13,000 gyms and fitness centers across the country. The average gym membership costs between $40 and $60 a month. However, 77% of Canadians prefer to work out at home. A lawsuit has been launched in British Columbia by residents who are seeking compensation from the devastating floods in BC's Fraser Valley. The plaintiffs and business owners Ted Dykeman and Caroline Mostertman allege the province and local authorities failed to warn residents of the impending disaster, limiting their ability to save any of their belongings. The defendants, which include the City of Abbotsford, the Fraser Valley Regional District, and the province of BC, all declined comment as the matter is now before the courts. On November 14th, southern BC was hit by record-breaking rainfall that contributed to a breach of the Sumas Dike in 2 places. The flooding destroyed homes, crops, and killed thousands of livestock. 5 people also died from rain-related mudslides. The new year means new taxes. A report from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says your federal tax bill is going up. To discuss this in more detail is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, joins us now from Ottawa. Franco, how much is that federal income tax bill going up thanks to rising payroll taxes?
This year, expect to pay an extra $333 through the Canada Pension Plan, and a total of about $3,500 in total. EI contributions are going up as well this year, an extra $63 for a total of about $953 in 2022. But it doesn't stop there. You're also seeing higher federal carbon tax, rising alcohol taxes, and even property tax hikes in many big cities across Canada. Now, this is the worst possible time to be seeing rising taxes. Many Canadian families are still struggling with the rising cost of living. And we have to remember that during the pandemic, many people in the private sector lost their job, took a pay cut, maybe even lost their small business. So we should be seeing the opposite. We should be seeing taxes going down, not up.
Now, understand that a few provinces, including Alberta, will also be seeing a tax increase thanks to bracket creep. Can you explain what exactly bracket creep is and what kind of an increase we're talking about?
Bracket creep is a very sneaky backdoor form of an income tax hike, and it happens when politicians stop moving the tax system with inflation. So inflation can automatically bump taxpayers into paying higher income taxes, even though what we can afford to buy hasn't actually increased. This year, Alberta taxpayers each will be hit with bracket creep, ranging from an extra $44 all the way up to an extra $141 this year. But But all the way back to 2020, when this really first took place, the total cost is between $105 all the way up to an extra $331 for each Alberta income taxpayer. And we have to remember, Premier Jason Kenney, he promised Albertans that he would not be raising taxes. So this is a broken promise by his own standards.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, joining us from Ottawa. The Alberta economy is recovering and a number of sectors are on the upswing. That's according to the Chief Economist of Alberta Central. Charles St. Arnaud says that's thanks to our province diversifying and seeing the potential that green projects have in our economy.
Well, some recent reports are saying that the whole transition to carbon neutrality by 2050 could generate about 150,000 jobs in Alberta alone and generate about for $60 billion to our economy by 2050. So we're talking big money, and it's all that investment phase of creating those projects and then gradually building that capacity.
Catch the full interview with Charles St. Arnaud coming up after Business News. You know, many times late at night when you look up into the sky, you'll see satellites flying around. Dr. Craig Coburn is a professor of geography and the environment with the University of Lethbridge. He says NASA contacted his group last year to help with the U.S. Geological Survey. He says those satellites you see are vital for giving us important information from around the world.
This is part of a global effort that's been going on since the 70s just to monitor our planet. And I think it's incredibly cool. But we're able to convince them, of course, because a lot of people in the general public don't really understand that this is happening every day, all the time. But we're not up there trying to see if you're doing something nefarious. We're just trying to see what our impact on the world is.
Catch the entire interview with Dr. Coburn and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our program. The Western Hockey League announced that a couple of Lethbridge Hurricanes games have been postponed due to more players being added to the COVID-19 protocol list. Friday's home game against the Moose Jaw Warriors has been postponed, as is Saturday's game in Red Deer against the Rebels. For fans with tickets to the January 7th contest, game officials say you should hold on to your tickets and they'll be honored for the rescheduled game. The league also announced that it is pausing team activities for the Edmonton Oil Kings, Red Deer Rebels, and Moose Jaw Warriors due to more players and staff testing positive for the COVID-19 virus. The International Ice Hockey Federation says it is investigating a disturbance on a New Year's Eve Air Canada flight that was waiting to take off in Calgary. There were reports that the flight, which was headed to Frankfurt, was delayed 3 hours after Russian players and team officials refused to follow COVID-19 rules, and some of the group were smoking and vaping on board. The Hockey Federation says in a statement that it will refer the incident to its ethics board to determine if the Russian team's actions violated the Federation's ethics code. Calgary police say no arrests were made, and the Calgary Border Services Agency says there's no active investigation. The opposition party in Saskatchewan is calling on the province to delay the start of school this week due to rising COVID-19 cases. NDP leader Ryan Miley says the return to class should be delayed until next week. He is also calling on Premier Scott Moe to create a comprehensive Omicron strategy. The Premier said last week that while the government is expecting higher cases due to the contagious Omicron variant, hospitalizations and ICU admissions were at their lowest levels since August.
Fact of the matter is we do need to learn how to live with COVID. We can't keep our kids out of school forever. We can't lock down our communities and our community events and our businesses forever. We need to figure out how to use these tools effectively to keep COVID at a, yes, it's going to be present in our communities, but to keep it at a level where it doesn't overwhelm our hospital system and where it ultimately allows us to live.
The Manitoba government is delaying a return to class as COVID-19 numbers continue to rise. Premier Heather Stephenson says remote learning will begin January 10th and students will be back in classes a week later.
As previously announced, students were set to return to the classroom on January 10th following an extended winter break. Today, we are announcing a one-week remote learning period beyond January 10th to help ensure schools can implement enhanced measures for the safe return of in-person learning. We know that our youth learn best in a classroom setting. It is our goal to ensure they can return to the classroom as quickly as possible.
The Government of Ontario announced new public health measures aimed at slowing the spread of the Omicron variant. The new measures include closing indoor dining at restaurants and bars, pausing non-urgent surgeries, reducing social gathering limits, and moving schools online. The new measures kick in on Wednesday. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he's concerned that the new variant could overwhelm their healthcare system.
Ontario Health modeling tells us we could be thousands of beds short in the coming weeks. We can't let that happen. This data is clear call to further action. We must do everything in our powers to protect our hospitals and to ensure our frontline workers aren't overwhelmed. We've been adding new beds across the province for many months and will continue to do so. The investments we've made in our hospitals are larger than any previous government in the history of Ontario. But with a variant as infectious as Omicron, with spreads like nothing we've seen before, added capacity alone isn't enough.
Residents of Louisville, Colorado returned to their homes after a massive wildfire destroyed close to 1,000 homes. 2 people also remain unaccounted for.
I have 4 friends that live on this block. This was the best Christmas decoration block in town. You can see the Christmas lights on that tree. You can still see them over here. I used to walk my dog here at least 3 times a week up and down the street. I've lived in Louisville for 26 years, and I'm just heartbroken for our town and all of our friends that lost everything. It's devastating. I have friends that live on that cul-de-sac. They got out of here remarkably. Their house just has smoke damage. So the erratic behavior of the fire is just incredible.
We heard that we needed to evacuate, and we grabbed our dog and our iPads.
And clothes on our back.
And the clothes on our back. And within 5 minutes, our neighbors called and said the fire department was coming down, telling everybody to get out. And it wasn't much longer than that our son called and saw news coverage up the hill, and he could see that there were flames on our roof.
A major fire tore through South Africa's 138-year-old Parliament building on Sunday. The blaze gutted offices and caused some ceilings to collapse at a site that has hosted some of the country's biggest moments. Prosecutors have charged a 49-year-old man living in Cape Town with arson, theft, and possession of explosives in connection with the fire. Zandil Maif is accused of starting the fire, which began early Sunday and was not extinguished until Tuesday morning. He remains in custody, and prosecutors have opposed bail, citing the severity of the charges. Samaritan's Purse is distributing emergency food supplies to families in the Philippines affected by a super typhoon that killed 375 people and displaced hundreds of thousands of others.
Hello, I'm Ruth Santos. I'm with the Samaritan's Purse team here in Southern Leyte in the Visayas region in the Philippines. Southern Leyte is one of the areas hardest hit by Super Typhoon Rai, locally named Odette, which has impacted about 2.3 million people, displaced about 600,000. As you can see, the strong winds, the intensity of the winds has destroyed this part of the concrete structure, and power outage is widespread. Bank services are down, communication services are down. Right now, our team is distributing emergency food packs. As we continue to reach people with aid, we do ask for prayers and continued support as we remind people that the Lord loves them and has not forgotten them.
Yes, praying for so many of those families affected by that super typhoon in the Philippines. Well, here in our region, Environment Canada issued an extreme cold warning for much of southwestern Alberta. How long will the cold temperatures continue? Full weather details are coming up. Well, we had an extreme cold warning today from Environment Canada. In fact, we saw wind chill values of about -39, along with more snow in the city. Tonight, there's a chance of even more flurries developing with a low near -29. Wednesday, we should see a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near -25. Thursday, more snow developing with a high of only -22. The white stuff should taper off on Friday, and we should get up to -17. More sunshine is expected again on Saturday, with a high again near -17. The Chinook winds will be arriving on Sunday, with the mercury climbing up to -1. On Monday, we should get all the way up to 12 degrees. Now, the average high for this time of year is -2, with an average low of -14. The highest temperature on this date was recorded back in 1984 at 16 degrees. and the record low was minus 33 in 1965. Sunrise was at 8:28, the sunset at 4:45. Let's have a look at how things are shaping up across the country on Wednesday. Expect lots of rain and 3 degrees in Victoria, BC, a mixture of sun and cloud and 2 degrees for Vancouver. Calgary should see more snow and a high of only minus 25 on Wednesday. Edmonton will be mostly cloudy and a high of minus 27. A chance of flurries developing and minus 25 in Regina on Wednesday. Snow and minus 27 for Saskatoon. Overcast and minus 25 degrees for Winnipeg. In the central part of the country, it's a lot warmer. Expect rain and 4 degrees in Toronto, flurries and +1 for Ottawa. Mainly cloudy and -1 degree in Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, expect rain mixed with snow and 4 degrees in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Showers and 6 degrees in Halifax, Nova Scotia. A chance of flurries and 3 degrees in Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect snow and a high of -1 on Wednesday. A judge in New York has ruled a class action lawsuit filed against BlackBerry by buyers of its common stock can proceed to trial. The suit filed in 2013 alleges the Waterloo, Ontario-based company defrauded investors by misleading them about the success of the BB10 devices. BlackBerry denied several of the plaintiffs' claims and asked for them to be dismissed. The judge threw out several of the allegations but found genuine issues of material fact remain in dispute, so other claims can proceed. A Christmas video created by now ex-employees at WestJet is circulating, showing a number of employees turning in their WestJet gear at the airline's head office. The company announced back in September that employees who fail to achieve full vaccination status by October 30th will face unpaid leave or termination of employment. According to the video, many of those terminated were months away from retirement packages that they will never obtain. Mayo Schmidt has stepped down as president and chief executive of fertilizer giant Nutrien after less than a year on the job. Schmidt was appointed as CEO last April after joining the company's board in 2012 and becoming chair in 2019. Company officials say Ken Seitz, who was executive vice president, has been named interim CEO. Nutrien chair Russ Girling says the board will begin a global search for a new CEO that will consider internal and external candidates. Ford Motor Company says it will nearly double production of its electric F-150 Lightning pickup truck based on a high number of advanced reservations. The company says it will be able to build at a rate of 150,000 trucks per year by the middle of next year. Previously, Ford expected to build 80,000 of the trucks per year at the new factory in Michigan, which will likely have to be expanded to handle the increased output. The company says close to 200,000 people who have put down $100,000 deposits on the trucks are being asked to convert their reservations to actual orders by picking a dealer and agreeing on a price. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 13 points on the day to finish at 21,237. The Dow was up 214 points to 36,800. The S&P 500 was down 3 points to 4794. And the Nasdaq was down 210 points on the day to 15,623. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 91 cents to 76.99 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 6 cents to 375 US. Gold was down 13 cents to 1814.47 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 23.05 US an ounce. Wheat is at $12.79 per bushel, barley's at $9.80. Canola's at $23.22, and corn is at $10.61 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.10 to $137.83. Feeder cattle were down $3.58 to $162.68, and lean hogs were down 98 cents to $80.15. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.68 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the province announced that Albertans who've had at least 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine who test positive for the virus will now only need to isolate for 5 days instead of 10. Health Minister Jason Copping made the announcement, saying fully immunized individuals have shorter infectious periods. The Alberta economy is rebounding quite nicely. Now, that's according to the chief economist with Alberta Central, Charles St. Arnaud. He says a big reason is because our province is learning how to diversify. And he'll have details for us in just a moment. As 2022 sneaks up on us, how are things looking for the Alberta economy? Joining me now to talk about this is Charles St. Arnaud. He's the Chief Economist for Alberta Central, which is the Central Banking Facility Service Bureau and Trade Association for Alberta's credit unions. Charles, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Alberta's gone through some pretty tough economic times over the last few years. Now, especially that we're in the middle of the pandemic right now. When will we finally see the light at the end of the tunnel here in our province?
Well, we're already kind of seeing it. Like 2021 was kind of the rebound from the hard hit from COVID and the secondary shock from the drop in oil prices. So we had a very sharp economic contraction in 2020. And then now economic activity has been picking up. And we expect that by early 2022, the Alberta economy will pass its peak that it reached in 2014. So we'll finally start to expand from where we were 7 years ago.
Now, as usual, the energy sector is leading the way here in the province, but do you think that will continue throughout 2022? Will we see oil at $70, $80 US a barrel consistently?
The oil industry has been very important in 2021, but it's the economic recovery has been relatively broad-based. It's been consumer, it's been oil, it's been a bit of investment. But obviously, oil has been, I would say, probably one of the least told story or the least understood story. The turnaround in that industry has been extremely important and major. If we go back in the middle of the pandemic in April 2020, the value of the oil produced in the province was about $1 billion per month. Turn around to October 2021, it's now 10 billion. That's about 3 billion more than the peak we had in 2014. So the value of what we're producing now is higher than it was in the previous boom. And that's major because that will have some very positive tailwind on our economy, pushing wages, pushing income for the workers industry. It will also lead to better investment in the industry. But I will temper that we're probably not coming back to the boom years of the pre-2050. But it's still a positive tailwind on our economy going forward.
Now, Charles, some industry analysts say that our province is actually now one of the leaders in Canada for renewable energy projects. Can you explain why this is happening and where maybe some of these projects are being built?
Well, I think gradually people are realizing that Alberta has a tremendous potential in renewable energy. We know that there's a big transition worldwide to reduce our carbon emission, to decarbonize our whole economy. And obviously here in Alberta, we can either see it as a challenge to our more traditional industry, which is oil and gas, or see the opportunity, and this opportunity are really in the renewable. We have the resources. We have, well, being in Southern Alberta, we see how many days of sunshine we have, and we can really harvest that. We have tremendous wind power. Also, what sometimes I find is lesser exploited, but has a lot of potential. Geothermal could be big in the province, especially considering our expertise with all the drillers in the oil and gas industry that have tremendous expertise into drilling holes in the ground. So we have those capacity. It's just what we need is the investment, but also seizing those opportunities as they arise. The way I think we can see renewable right now in Alberta is probably where oil sands were in the 80s. Yeah, we're planting the seed for an industry that will be there in 20, 30 years from now, and that will be generating tremendous amount of revenues and wealth.
Now, you mentioned wind energy earlier, and here, when people talk about winds that are 100 to 120 kilometers an hour, we just call that a Wednesday here in Lethbridge, category 1 winds, but we see a lot of the wind farms and the wind turbines absolutely creating that. Any idea how many jobs these green energy projects will create and how much of an economic boost they'll actually provide for our economy?
Well, some research reports are saying that the whole transition to carbon neutrality by 2050 could generate about 150,000 jobs in Alberta alone and generate about for $60 billion to our economy by 2050. So we're talking big money, and it's all that investment phase of creating those projects and then gradually building that capacity.
Now, we've had some new hydrogen project announcements recently as well, including the massive expansion and emissions-cutting retrofit of Dow Chemical's ethylene plant. Charles, how soon will we see tangible economic growth kicking in from the hydrogen projects?
Well, hydrogen, we're still roughly at the infancy of that source of energy. It's has a tremendous potential because a lot of industry cannot rely on electrification. Like a good example would be just freight train. It's too energy consuming to just use electricity. But by using hydrogen, you could probably potentially avoid using diesel fuel. So that's where the potential, a lot of those big industrial plants could also be running on hydrogen. And us, Alberta, having tremendous resource in natural gas, we can use that resource to create hydrogen. So we're still at the infancy, but it's one of those where we're planting the seed for where we want to be in the future.
So where is Alberta at when it comes to the tech sector? Are we seeing more tech companies potentially moving to Calgary, where you are, and filling up some of those vacant downtown buildings?
We're seeing a lot more investment. Like 2021 was one of the best year, I think, in terms of investment in the tech industry. Alberta has been attracting way more than its fair share of compared to other provinces in terms of foreign investment in tech. So there's a lot of hope and a lot of positive environment being built right now in Calgary to bring that more of a tech hub that will revitalize in some ways our city.
Now, residential real estate seems to have had a fairly good year in our province. Why do you think that was, and will that continue into the new year?
Yeah, well, there's different reasons why real estate did well. First is, well, with the pandemic, many were starting to think about, well, maybe I need more space. You're starting to work from home. Well, having a proper home office starts to make sense. Having outdoor space when you cannot go, when you're stuck at home, makes a lot of sense. So there was that natural demand where preference was changing. But also, even though the economic contraction was big, there was still a significant proportion of the population that actually enjoyed no change in their revenues. Yet they couldn't go and spend, and they had more money. So there was more income available to go and house purchases, and also low interest rates helping too. We've had record low mortgage rate, and that has been helping the real estate market. But we're seeing the latest numbers. We're still having a level of transaction volumes much higher than where we were in the previous peak in 2014, and that is, I think, to continue going into 2022. We have a lot of positives. So the labor market continues to improve. The continued improvement in the oil and gas, that increased value of production and that leads to increased income, will continue to push the housing market. And I'll be surprised, we might have a little rush of buyer coming in the market, especially in the first half of the year, to try to lock in a mortgage before rate starts to go up around the mid of 2022. But even with the rate hike, I still think that housing activity will remain close to what we have right now. So we'll remain very strong.
You know, I've been telling my adult kids who are back in Southern Ontario, you know, to get out of Southern Ontario, come here to Alberta, where, you know, housing is a lot more affordable, because there's no way that they can afford a down payment, you know, on a $750,000, $800,000 house. Even 5 points down, you're $40,000. That's very difficult to try and raise that kind of money on an $800,000 home. So I'm kind of working on my kids, my adult children, to move back home here to Alberta. Now, Charles, will the commercial real estate sector, as we talked about earlier with those big towers, office towers in Calgary being vacant, will they see any improvements there, or do you think the struggle will continue into 2022?
Well, it will continue in 2022. It will take time to see the turnaround. We'll need to see new businesses being created. So we're still in the early stage of we're in the recovery. We're starting the expansion, and that will be when new businesses will start to increase. We'll be able, especially here in Calgary, attract more of those tech industries that will take some more space in those towers. But it's a slow process. But there's a lot of projects to help, in some ways, rebalance the supply and demand of commercial real estate, especially converting some of the buildings to other use than just pure commercial. But it's a long-term project. It's not something that will turn around within a year or two.
Now, Lethbridge and other areas here in southwestern Alberta has a thriving food processing industry. Where do you see that headed to in 2022?
That's for sure. It will continue. Like, everybody needs to eat. That's and there's a lot of know-how. One of the things that's often misunderstood or not really well appreciated is how much we talk about tech industry in Calgary, when we talk about, Amazon cloud computing and all those kind of things. But that sounds maybe sexy, but a lot of the agri-tech industry is very important, very big in Alberta. And there's a lot of investment happening in that. And a lot of it is centered around the Lethbridge area. And that will continue because, well, nothing will change. We'll still need to eat in 2022 and 2023. And finding those new technology to reduce the cost and improve yields will be important.
How about the agriculture sector here in southwestern Alberta and maybe across the province? Will things continue to improve for a lot of our producers?
Well, I think many producers will want to forget 2021 with the drought and in some ways the devastating harvest for many. So the hope is we'll get a better harvest in 2022, especially that with very weak supply around the world for wheat and other agricultural product, prices are still very high. So if they just get normal yields in 2022, they'll be able to have very strong revenue. So that's the hope going in 2022, is that we actually have a normal harvest season so they can at least recover some of the loss of 2021.
Now, Charles, when it comes to the retail sector, are we anticipating any improvements? And are you seeing more people shopping online as opposed to going to your brick and mortar stores?
I think early in the pandemic, obviously, everybody's shift to online, and that was probably a bit of an issue for many brick and mortars. We still have that trend, but I think a lot of retailers have been very quick at offering curbside pickup, being able to pre-order online, but to pick up at the store so you don't have to pay the shipping fees. So there's still that attraction. And when we look at retail sales in general in the province, we're actually doing relatively well. We're slightly ahead of the rest of the country in terms of what I would call core retail sales. So if we remove motor vehicle sales and those kind of more volatile component, we're actually doing relatively well. So it's more of a question is, as we go back to normal, are consumers more willing to go back to the stores? I can see in Calgary, when you go to more independent store, there is a bit more, people are more willing to say, well, let's go to the small independent store this year for some of our Christmas gift, rather than ordering everything from online and delivered at home. So the hope is that a lot of consumers will make that switch gradually and realizing that they need to support their local.
Let's talk about a restaurant industry for just a moment here as well, Charles. They've been hit very hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. Is there light at the end of the tunnel there?
Well, it's an industry that is still struggling. We can still see it in the data. It's still an industry where level of employment is still well below where it was pre-COVID-19. Same in terms of level of economic activity in those sectors. So it's still struggling, and it's still hard for them because now we have, yes, it's easier for them. There's less restriction. It's only, you have the proof of vaccination, which helps the consumer to feel more safe at going into public spaces. But there's still, you can see it, capacity is still relatively weak. A lot of families have changed their behaviors. They kind of realize that, well, maybe having dinner at home, we've got used to it, so they're continuing a bit more. So the hope is gradually things will come to normal, but the pandemic is still not done. So we'll have to see. It will take longer for that industry to recover.
Which sectors in our economy here are you seeing the highest labor shortages? And will we see any changes in that regard?
Well, there's two big sectors where we're seeing labor shortages. One is, on one side, you have all the tech industry, which have been in high demand as every business is turning online for either working from home or setting up a selling platform online. So that area of specialized work has been extremely in demand. And very competitive. At the other end of the scale, it's the food and accommodation area, and some of the more frontline service workers are in high demand, and there's a lot of report of businesses having issues finding workers in those sectors. And there it's a combination of different factors. One is a lot of the workers who lost their job during the pandemic in those sectors are no longer working or looking for work in those industries. So a waiter who's lost his job in the food industry after so many waves of restrictions has decided, well, I'm moving on, I'm going to a new sector. So that kind of creates less worker available. Another factor that's very important in Canada is that the fact that we haven't had a lot of immigration over the past 2 years has dramatically reduced the size of our workforce. So in Alberta, my quick estimates is that we're probably missing about 50 to 55,000 workers compared to where we would be pre-pandemic. So that creates some frictions here and there in the labor market, and that sometimes it's surprising considering that our unemployment rate is still slightly above where it was pre-pandemic. But it's really a mismatch in terms of who's looking for work and who actually needs to hire people.
Charles St. Arnaud is the chief economist for Alberta Central. Thanks so much for joining me today from Calgary.
Thank you for having me.
Well, here in southern Alberta, science and agriculture go hand in hand. Today, we're talking with an expert in remote sensing and farming. Now, this goes far beyond your TV remote control and your grandparents' grain farm. Today, we have Dr. Craig Coburn joining us from the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Coburn's work focuses on the aspects of remote sensing science. All of the scientific research helps growers and researchers better understand agricultural crops and other biological systems. Dr. Craig Coburn, thank you so much for joining us today. So great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So first off, for those of us who maybe don't know or don't quite understand, start off by explaining exactly what remote sensing is.
Well, remote sensing is what we're doing right now. So we're watching, a television screen with our eyes. So we're viewing this. So if we think about taking that same kind of technology and putting it up into space, then we are using satellites to view the Earth's surface and to get information from the data that we derive.
Wow, that's so cool. And we don't really think about it because we just use it every day, don't we? So is your work and research really a high-tech bird's eye view of a farmer's field? Maybe explain that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Much of the research that we do is charged with answering fundamental questions like things like how are the plants growing? How is that crop developing? What can we expect in terms of yield? Those are sorts of really basic questions that people have asked for a long time. And again, from space, we're now able to collect data that can help us derive that piece of information that's needed in modern agriculture.
So was the study of remote sensing then just kind of a logical step of a transition for you?
It's one of the areas in geography that involves geospatial technology. So you'll notice that on cell phones and other things, you can't, 10, 15 years ago, I used to have a hard time telling people what I did. Now I just tell them I make Google Earth work and they understand. But when I was doing my graduate degrees, I used to just tell people I made maps for a living, and that would stop them from imagining all kinds of crazy things that I might do. We're geographers, we make maps. These are the technologies that we now use in order to provide information to help manage and monitor our Earth.
That's so cool. So how long has remote sensing technology been around?
Well, we've had active space programs since 1972. We've always wanted to look at ourselves from above. I mean, it's just a human thing. Whenever you can get on top of a hill and look over where you were, it satisfies a human need to know. So it's an interesting thing. As soon as we were able to get airborne, one of the first things we put in a plane was a camera. We wanted to see it. And before we had planes, we had balloons, and we used to put cameras outside the balloons and take the same photograph that every farm I've ever been at has, usually hanging in the dining room, that shows you your farm. That we've been doing that since the 1850s. So these are the kinds of things that just people find it fascinating. They find these things really interesting. But yeah, we've been at it digitally monitoring Earth since the early 70s.
Okay, awesome. So what are some of the ways that farmers in southern Alberta are using this technology to enhance their farming?
Well, we can use it for really basic things like just trying to tell health and condition is probably the biggest one. So crop health and condition we use really typically, and it's not easily done, but it's reasonably straightforward. Let's put it that way, because some of this gets a little bit high tech, and I don't think people want me to go off and deliver that particular lecture. But we can also do things weed detection. That's a new and upcoming area of interest. There's all sorts of modeling that goes on that requires some kind of geospatial input. So that might be on the government side, where they're trying to model the bigger picture of how agriculture is doing across the country. So at every level, right from the producer all the way up to those folks in governments that are trying to organize how the whole system works. We are the people that are providing the data.
Well, that's really fascinating. So what have been some of the limitations in the past with this technology?
I think the number one biggest limitation was we just weren't ready for, we didn't have the computing power, we didn't have the ability to visualize it, we couldn't get it to a producer for free, which we can do now. There were a lot of limitations. I mean, technologically, we still suffer that we cannot download all of the data that we can collect from space right now. So we're always pushing the boundary in terms of what we can do. So those were the limitations. Again, 10, 15 years ago, I always tell my students that in 1972, we barely had color television. And we didn't have a video game. My students have a hard time conceptualizing this. And yet we were imaging from space. We were doing the entire globe. So those are, it's difficult for people to sort of capture that. But when you want to bring it right down to people and having these things being utilized in a daily way to manage a modern farm, then it's all about getting data and it's all about making it usable. And so we've had to break down any number of barriers. There's lots of companies, some of them are in Lethbridge, many are in Western Canada generally, that are involved with taking those pieces of data and putting them into digestible bits that farmers are then able to utilize operationally.
Well, that's a really good way to describe it, sort of in a layman's terms. And how do they use it? It's amazing because you're talking about outer space, pinpointing down on a little farmer's crops there. So it really is amazing to me. How is it specifically helping them exactly?
Well, imagine the scenario where you've got, say, the ability to vary the rate of fertilizer application, or you might have some other variable rate technology. One of the things that you need as an input on the farm side is where would we do the application? So if we were going to vary the fertilizer, so if we can reduce input costs and we can get the same growth response from the plant, then we can go ahead and increase productivity and also put money on the bottom line. So when we do those sorts of things, then again, we've got satellites above, they've got giant telescopes, so they see a long way, and we can get it right down to some pretty small areas. And there's other technologies as well. I mean, we're not, there's unmanned aerial vehicles and other things that can be even closer to the target. But from space itself, then we're able to look down on those small spots on Earth, and we're able to take and collect the information that we get there. So we've got, in essence, what the color of the plant is. And then we will be able to do those kinds of variable rate pieces. So we give the information that allows the technology to operate.
That is very, very cool. Does this technology have applications beyond farming?
It's an interesting thing. Oftentimes my students get a little bit excited about it when I list off the number of application areas that are governed by remote sensing. So even if you just start by turning on the satellite, if you click on the satellite button on Google Maps, that's us. So every time you do any of those things, so it could be natural resource driven. So it could be agriculture, it could be forestry, it could be mining. Those folks are using it. It could be, say, for example, we want to watch urban growth. Where are people on this planet? Yeah, we do that. If you want to know how it is that we have information that lets us understand our impact on our planet generally, deforestation, global warming things, are the ice caps really disappearing? Well, of course, we watch that every day. These are all climate variables. We're monitoring CO2 in the atmosphere. These are all, there's a list that would go on. We would waste the entire show just covering the list of contributions that remote sensing makes to the monitoring of Earth. But we used to be in the background, right? So we used to be the people that enabled, we did the science and technology that enabled those data pieces to get pushed forward. Now people are starting to ask questions like yourself about, well, what exactly are you doing? I've talked to any number of producers and they say things like, you're spying on me. And I always say, well, yeah, but we have been since I was a child. This isn't new. This is, it's just that we're now making it useful. And you now know that, there's a large remote sensing group at the University of Lethbridge. There's 5 of us that are in the group. That's an unusual collection across Canada. We're one of Canada's largest remote sensing groups. And those are the things that we were interested in. So it's, again, if you name it, we're probably involved. If it involves geographical things across our planet, then we're there.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, maybe describe your development of a 6-band system, or better yet, tell us what the bands are, and then maybe about the development that you've made.
Oh, so I do remote sensing fundamental work. So I do remote sensing physics. That's my specialty. So I build things. That's the way I shorten it up. So if scientists can't build their own tools, then they're forced to ask the questions that those who do build the tools ask. I want to ask my own questions. And in order to do that, I have to literally get in and do a little bit of electronics. I do know how to weld, so I build giant robots and things. But I started building camera systems. So these were camera systems that were meant to be inexpensive. I developed, I don't even know how many now. It's quite a few, but if there's an imaging system out there, I've probably tinkered with it in the lab. So and then we would design those things. So the 6-band system that I developed, that was a long time ago, and it was developed specifically around questions to deal with the remote sensing of vegetation. So it's vegetation. If you don't have a farm, you don't eat and you die. So it's really important that we get high quality information about plants generally, but about crops specifically. So in order to do that, I developed a system that had 6 spectral bands. So we're going to place bands in areas where we understand from our biologist colleagues exactly what that plant is doing at that point in terms of how it's reacting to light. So that might be looking at how is it photosynthesizing? Is the chlorophyll active? Those kinds of things. Then we can tell from that, we can go, look, if we see that it's photosynthesizing this much, then we get this is what color it is. But our vision of color extends past what people can see in the visible light range, and we extend off into the infrared. And those are the tricky bits to sense, but we can do that kind of work.
Okay, so Dr. Coburn, this is all like super exciting, but maybe talk about what's the latest and greatest, most groundbreaking stuff that you've done in the past week or month, say.
Well, Jeanette, the most important thing that we've done, and probably for me anyways, in the last few weeks, is the University of Lethbridge with me at the helm was part of the team that was doing the calibration for United States Geological Survey and NASA's latest satellite mission. So Landsat's the most important Earth observation satellite system to date, and we were part of a global team that was out doing the calibration of that sensor.
Okay, so what exactly does that mean? What do you do? What did it do?
Well, the fun part there was when you get a phone call from NASA, you usually pick up. And when they ask if you'd be willing to join the global team to do some calibration for their latest $1 billion satellite effort, you also say yes. And then it was mostly about finding a willing, in this case, a willing rancher down just south of Bow Island who has a grazing lease, and we thank him very much for the opportunity to go out and wander around in this marvelous area of reasonably native prairie. And it's a big, wide area. It's very consistent in terms of its tone. And we just happen to be, so we do research in that area, and we just happen to be in exactly the right spot to help the global calibration effort. So they were putting their current satellite and the next satellite were flying on the same path, which is almost never done. It only was going to happen for a few weeks, and we did happen to get a nice sunny day in southern Alberta to go out and provide data to the United States Geological Survey as well as NASA in order that they can calibrate that sensor.
That's amazing. I'm just curious, when you're researching the land and you contact these ranchers and farmers, what's their reaction?
They oftentimes are confused. They don't realize that we're watching, and it's not for the reasons they think. This is part of a global effort that's been going on since the 70s just to monitor our planet. And I think it's incredibly cool. But we're able to convince them, of course, because a lot of people in the general public don't really understand that this is happening every day, all the time. But we're not up there trying to see if you're doing something nefarious. We're just trying to see what our impact on the world is. So and those are the interesting pieces. But oftentimes they wonder, like, you can see me. I remember when I've contacted several folk, especially in the ranching side. And I'll ask them about their land, and I'll say, well, I need to get over into this area. I need to be in the southwest corner of this particular field at this time. And I see that there's a power line and that you've got a pen over here. And they're like, how are you doing this? And I'm like, look, I'm in Lethbridge, but I'm actually on the government website. I'm able to call it up. Like, I can just zoom in and I can see where that area is, and I can see there's a power line, and I'm going to be at the second power transmission tower, and I need to be in about halfway into your field. Is that okay? And they oftentimes are quite surprised that we can get that kind of detail from space. And I'm always on the other side, because for us, those of us that do the research, we always forget that people don't know that we do this. So there's always this very interesting little moment where they realize that we know, and we realize that they don't know. And then we come to a meeting in the middle somewhere, and we have to tell them that this is okay. This is how we monitor the entire planet. You're not special. We're not even interested in you. We're just going to go out, have a look at what we can see.
Amazing. And Dr. Coburn, if people want to learn more about your work or this technology, where can they look?
University of Lethbridge does have a website. I've got a certain amount of stuff that's up there. I am the department chair, so you can always find me. I'm relatively easy to find. A lot of our work, of course, is published, and those things are all sitting in the public domain, so they're available for people to read. If you need the Coles Notes version of it because it's a little long and it gets a bit boring, then you're always welcome to send me an email, and I'll try to respond to as many questions as we would get.
Awesome. Dr. Craig Coburn, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate hearing about all the great research taking place at the University of Lethbridge, as always.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.